off my lawn! But first, subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit that notification button so that we get to annoy you every time we upload a video. Dad's podcast is now available wherever you listen to podcasts or on YouTube at the Old Cranky Man Collectibles YouTube channel. Magic Dads is brought to you by Old Cranky Man Collectibles and all of our generous patrons over at patreon.com/MtG Dads Podcast. Go check it out for exclusive content and so much more. Hey everybody, welcome to the Magic Dads Podcast. I'm your host Blake, and I'm here with Stefan.
Hey everybody, how you doing? Oh man, been a weekend, man. How you doing?
We have had a very long weekend, but it has been also very, very rewarding. I don't think that I would trade this time in my life for anything.
It's sort of been a build up for us in a lot of ways, and represents a level of a culmination of a lot of hard work.
Yeah, a lot of hard work.
Yeah, and so if we sound a little raspy or a little tired in this video, the reason is sort of, we had a big event this weekend that we got to do, and
yep, we were both in we were both in the coverage booth for the Old Cranky Man Team Trios.
Yep.
On Saturday. The VODs for those will be up on YouTube sometime this week.
Mm-hmm. Very excited to see those too.
Yep, and then we did a little Canadian Highlander stream this afternoon. So a full weekend of magic.
Breaks.
When I was younger, I was always like, I could do nothing but do magic all the time. That's no problem. Mm-hmm. And well, here I am.
Yeah. And do you regret that, or
absolutely not?
Absolutely not. Wouldn't change it for anything.
No, absolutely not.
Actually living the dream. Oh my gosh.
My inner child has reached the zenith.
We're healing. The world is healing, Blake. We've returned to cardboard.
Speaking of cardboard, it's Monday, and that means we're going to talk about Canadian Highlander.
Dadlander, baby.
So, you recall last week we started a series where we are going to talk about all of the 7-point cards.
Yes.
Last week we talked about Ancestral Recall.
Right.
Tell me what 7-point card we are going to talk about today.
We definitely alluded to this at the end of that video. We came to a consensus. This is one of my favorite cards. And I know it's sort of corny to say that, but Black Lotus is the Christopher Rush art. The original printing of it is so iconic, and it's so powerful. And whenever I tell people that I play Magic and they talk about the collections and how much cards are worth, the invariable question is, what is the most valuable card and what is the most powerful card? And I get to say the same answer to both of those questions, which is, I don't know that there's much of a dissenting opinion in this matter. That Black Lotus is unequivocally one of the most powerful and one of the most monetarily valuable cards ever printed in Magic the Gathering. It is a 0-mana artifact that you can tap and sacrifice to add 3 mana of any color to your mana pool. That's it. That's the text of the card. So why is this so powerful, Blake?
Because it's 3 lands at once.
Right. But you only get to use it once.
That doesn't matter. If you get to just... This is why Summer Bloom is banned in Modern, okay?
Mm-hmm. Summer Bloom represented a Black Lotus. A turn where you get to explode out mana.
Yeah, and with an Amulet of Vigor and a Karoo land, it represented 2 Black Lotuses.
Right. We actually saw a Modern deck that is sort of the progenitor, or not the progenitor, but the evolution of the original Summer Bloom deck that still performs without that card.
Yeah, it does.
And so we're sort of talking about, in comparison, where Ancestral Recall is a card that gives you additional cards, like potential outcome,
Yep.
with no additional resources to spend that. Black Lotus is sort of the inverse of that, where it is so much from a raw resource perspective without anything to spend it on its
There's
own.
plenty that I could spend it on.
Exactly. You don't need a lot to spend it on.
It is like the quintessential critical mass thing, right? You hear us talk
yeah.
about critical mass sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Decks that want to achieve and explosiveness, critical mass. So Black Lotus is the tantamount card that allows you to do that. It is
Agreed.
0 mana. It costs you exactly 1 card, and you go from having 1 mana to having 4 mana on the same turn.
Right. And we've talked about how we believe sort of that Moxen, the triple Mox spread, is kind of the current best, like, without comparison, best point spread in the format right now.
In a 3-color deck specifically,
in a 3-color deck,
I think triple Mox is where you want to be.
In Black Lotus represents a much more explosive burst of mana than even that.
Yep.
Which is fantastic.
Yep.
So
what decks are playing Black Lotus right now?
It's actually super limited, and that's sort of what's unfortunate to me, is the decks that play Black Lotus right now oftentimes play them as part of an engine or as part of a loop win con.
Yep.
2 of those are Eggs, which Wheeler sort of made. I think that was his baby.
It is his baby. Yeah.
And Eggs uses ways to loop artifacts from your graveyard back into play. Auriok Salvagers is sort of like the quintessential one. That win is called the Bomberman win, because Auriok Salvagers allows you to pull out artifacts from your graveyard into play for 2 mana.
Yep.
And because it can produce 3.
It makes infinite mana with Black Lotus.
Right. And then on top of that, can spend that resource by looping other things out of the graveyard.
Yep.
And this is one of the best decks to play Lotus in, just because it represents it has so many ways of finding Black Lotus and so many ways of abusing
it. Yep.
Yeah. The other deck that plays it is Storm. And a lot of these Storm lists have utilized traditionally, if they don't want to spend money spend points, that too though, on a Black Lotus, they will put in a Lion's Eye Diamond.
Yep.
Which has the obvious downside of requiring you to pitch your hand, and people still play that card.
So those full stop balls to the wall Storm decks are playing Black Lotus and Underworld Breach right now.
Correct. Some of them have been dipping into, instead of Underworld Breach, they've been doing Lotus, Yogg's Will, and then they get 2 extra points to play with. I don't know that that's the correct build. I still think Breach is probably the best way to play it.
Yeah, Underworld Breach is insane.
That's sort of a bonkers card, and the pair of the 2 are so good.
Yeah.
And it sort of has it does an impression of Auriok Salvagers in that way. But you
except it lets you play anything from your graveyard.
Correct. The engine is much more powerful and requires much less deck building restrictions or setup. And so it's just like a Stormwind that requires much less setup, requires much less investment in terms of deck building restrictions, and still gets the payoff of killing your opponent quickly and efficiently.
Yeah. Is anything else playing Black Lotus right now? Like, this is the Black Lotus deck. Eggs and Storm are really all that I can think of.
That's the only 2 that really come to my mind, unfortunately.
Okay, so what decks are not playing Black Lotus, but probably should be?
Okay, so I want to talk about, very briefly, Mana Crypt. It is a 5-point card.
Yep.
That can kill you.
Yes.
It is a 5-point card that I believe in a lot of situations where people are playing that card in their deck, they'd be better sacrificing 2 points from another place and just going in on Lotus. It's much less risky. It's much less all in terms of like, this can eventually kill you, because how many times have we seen people, if not die directly from their crypt?
Oh, I lose to Mana Crypt all the time.
Yeah, exactly. I have too. because of the random. It's effectively like what 1.5 damage per turn.
I've never won a crypt flip in my life, not one time.
Oh well, yeah, you should be better at Magic.
I recently submitted to the Guinness Book of World Records
For worst luck on coin flips.
most consecutive crypt flip losses.
Oh my god, that's so much damage too. 3 damage off of it is huge. It feels like a gut punch every time
So
you lose.
what is Mana Crypt recently? Not in the most recent point change, but in the
Right.
the point change before that,
Right.
they added a point to it because it was 4.
Yeah.
Now it's 5. What's playing Mana Crypt right now?
Okay, so the decks that are playing Mana Crypt often are generally one color decks that want to hit, like we talked about, that critical mass of mana and really muscle out cards from their hand. So
Yep.
Death and Taxes is one of those.
Okay.
Medium decks, medium red, medium green, in some
Yep.
cases like medium white decks. I don't think we've seen a lot of medium blue, but I think that any of those medium decks, including medium black, which is sort of an underplayed deck right now.
I love Medium Black.
It's so good. Mono black, like big black.
That was, I think, the second or third deck that I built when we started playing Canadian Highlander.
It's so good. It's hyper efficient. It's aggressive, and it can kill your opponent so fast. Have you ever hard cast a Grizzlebrand off of like Dark Rituals?
I didn't have Gristlebrand in my deck,
Oh.
but I have actually cast a Gristlebrand off of Dark Rituals.
So I think these are the decks that could much better utilize these punches of mana.
Yeah.
And yeah, we've talked about Fair Lotus, right?
No, and that's what this kind of is, right? It's a fair Lotus. So these decks that are playing Mana Crypt right now, like Death and Taxes. Let's talk about Death and Taxes. So
Okay,
Death and Taxes, it has, their curve is basically like 1 to 3. They play a lot of creatures on curve, and some of them have like taxing effects. Some of them make your life a little bit difficult. Other ones have like utility where you can like sacrifice it or tap it to do something. And then they play like equipment and removal, right? That's what these decks are. And then a lot of the times they use their lands to like interact with you even more. Rishadan Port, Wasteland, stuff like that. So they're using a Mana Crypt in a lot of cases to muscle out 3 drops on turn 1.
Right.
Do you know what you can do with a Black Lotus?
Is it a 4-drop on turn 1?
You can do a 4-drop on turn 1, or you can do a 1-drop and a 3-drop on turn 1.
2 2s?
You can do 2 2-drops on turn 1.
And I would say that the best use of this would be the point spread of Moxen, on-colored Mox, plus Lotus.
Plus Black Lotus. Yes. Then you can do a 3-drop and a 2-drop on turn 1.
Right. And on top of that, and this is sort of an additional kind of benefit of having Black Lotus in the deck, is with very little deck building changes, you can add loops. You could, in a mono white deck, just oopsie daisy out an Auriok Salvagers.
I don't know if I like Auriok Salvagers making infinite mana and Death and Taxes, but you could do that if you wanted to.
I don't even know that we need to make infinite. I just think maybe we need to make a lot.
Sure.
Because sometimes Death and Taxes has ways to utilize a lot of mana.
Luris of the Dream Den is pretty good with a Black Lotus.
Yes, exactly.
I would play Luris in Death and Taxes.
Yeah. So that's exactly the kind of situation I'm talking about, right? Good card gets even better with Black Lotus.
Most of the point spreads for these decks right now are Mana Crypt, On Color Moxen, Umezawa's Jitte.
Yeah, yes.
With the exception of red deck, which is Mana Crypt, On Color Moxen, Price of Progress, +1.
I think mana or the Mana Vault.
Mana Vault. That makes sense.
Yeah. I've seen some of them with Soul Ring spreads in there, so it's like Crypt Ring, Price of Progress.
Price of Progress.
Yeah. But I don't necessarily know if that's correct. Their deck tends to be pretty pip dense.
Yeah, it's a little bit different than the green and the white ones, because the mono green and the mono white decks are Crypt, Jit, Mox.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily believe that that's
Oh, you're
wrong per
losing.
se.
You're losing Umezawa's Jite. No, I'm here to tell you
Correct.
that losing Umezawa's Jite is not bad.
No.
Like, there's so many times where I see a deck that has a piece of equipment in its hand or on the battlefield, and the equipment is just doing absolutely nothing.
How much does GT cost to cast and equip?
4 total mana.
4 total mana.
Yeah.
And if we're talking about how much it does, I think it does a lot.
It does do a lot. It is totally worth the 2 points. All that I'm saying is that, like, not only do you get to free up a spot in your deck where you can stick another threat, but you also have way more explosive mana potential.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And just being able to high roll that even is way better than any potential loss in the removal of a GT, because oftentimes, especially with these medium green decks, you don't really care what they're doing with their creatures, right? Like,
No.
your removal suite is so limited that you oftentimes just outclass them on basically every level. So the third thing I wanted to talk about was decks that could play it. Maybe they don't have to, but they should consider it. And these are decks that sort of don't have a lot else going on with their points. These are things where, and this has come up a lot, where people will come to me and they'll go, hey, I have the, especially decks like goblins, creature-based strategies.
Okay.
Where they're very low to the ground. And maybe they don't necessarily need all the resources that could be supplied by a Black Lotus.
Right.
But the high roll potential is really what I'm getting at. So when we talk about, like, the Gruul Monsters deck, a lot of times that's playing Mox and then 4 points, like Soul Ring or whatever.
Soul Ring, yeah.
I feel like that deck could capitalize better on the high roll potential of a Lotus.
Yeah, I agree. So goblins, for example, it is generally speaking this go wide creature deck. So they have creatures all over the curve, lots of 1s, lots of 2s, and several 4s.
Yes.
And the idea is to play some number of these one mana guys, and then play one of these 2, 3s, or 4s that either give your team haste or make you additional goblins. Like, they just go very wide very quickly. And I think that
Siege Gate Commander.
I think that Cradlehoof is another deck that does a very similar thing that could probably benefit from, like, Lotus. Here's 3 mana dorks on turn 1.
Exactly. Because they don't need the continuance of that. All they need is the one big push.
Yep.
And then they got it from there. It's basically a jump start, right?
Right.
Like, you're starting up the car, and you're jumping to third gear.
Yep. So Lotus, natural order. Those are your points.
Bingo. Like, that sounds amazing to me.
And in Goblins, Lotus, Mox Ruby.
Yeah. Or Lotus, like, even if you don't want to do the Mox, you could do Lotus, Price of Progress, GT. Like, that sounds totally fine to me too. But just being able to muscle out, because when we think goblins, we're always like, okay, it's 1 and 2 creatures. No. They have 4 drops. They have 3 drops that are incredibly powerful.
The 1 and 2 drops, those are like, they'll chip in, they'll be like, here, I'll 1 you. Here's 3 damage. And then the real problems start when they start playing 4 drops.
Yes.
And now they have haste. Krinko suddenly makes 6 more 1/1 goblins a turn, and it gets out of control very quickly.
Or the Rabble Master effects. Those are all 3 mana.
Yes.
Like, those are insane cards.
Yes.
People not in Goblins play those cards.
Rabble Master on turn 1. I mean, they already have draws where they're like Lotus Petal, Ancient Tomb, Goblin Rabble Master.
Yes.
Or Exile Simian. Or Exile Simian Spirit Guide, Ancient Tomb, Krinko.
Yes. And that's totally reasonable plays. But what if more of those?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of those decks sort of just spread out their points because they don't know what else to do with them. They'll go like...
Well, part of the way that you can beat those kinds of decks is you beat them on the board. So they can only play 1 card a turn a lot of the times.
Yes.
They play a mountain and then they play a goblin. And if you can kill that goblin, then they have to start over again.
Yeah.
So if all of the sudden they get to put 3 or more goblins into play in the same turn, the rules of this engagement have changed.
It takes way more resources to deal with that. And you're going to die in the meantime.
Right.
We've seen people like you and I have played against Sean pretty regularly. He's our goblin player locally. And even without that punch, he kills folks dead real quick.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Now imagine if he just boosted that, the high roll was even higher. Right. I don't know that his deck really needs the Strip Mine GT or needs it feels like a lot of times these decks sort of dump their points in things that they could see as useful or toolbox cards.
Yes. It goes back to when we were talking about Mystical Tutor in the episode about the points changes and how people will make an excuse to play a card.
Right.
Like they'll either add cards to their deck to make that card work, or they'll work out lines of play in their head about what makes that card good in their deck. And
yeah,
I mean, I'm not saying that it's wrong to do that, but maybe you're trying too hard.
Yeah, don't overthink it.
Right.
Play Black Lotus.
Absolutely. Play a Black Lotus.
Play Black Lotus.
Just once.
Just try it.
You might not ever look back.
Yeah, you're probably give it a try. The first taste is free. Anything else you wanted to add?
No, nope. I think we are done.
Yeah, come and see me if you want to borrow one. I will gladly put it in your deck, and I will continue to try to talk people into playing it.
Joe, this is for you. You can borrow my Lotus whenever you want.
Yeah, get in there, sir.
Thanks everybody for listening to the Magic Dads podcast, and we just want to remind you that we're proud of you.